Hi, welcome to another edition of Business Bites. My name is David Tighe, the Managing Director of Bauer Media Audio here in Northern Ireland, and each week we catch up with a guest and get some insight and opinion from the world of business. This week I'm pleased to say that my guest is David Forde, who's the co-founder and CEO of Pathfinder Coaching and Development. David, welcome to Business Bites.
Good morning, David. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. We always crack straight into the conversation because time waits for no man or woman. So, David, Pathfinder Coaching and Development, people may know you for something else, but before we get into that, tell us about the journey that brought you to Pathfinder Coaching and Development. What's that all about?
What's that all about was many moons ago when I was throughout my professional football career. I was struggling with my own, I suppose you could call them your own demons. And I started to look at ways about, well, what's the next transition for me? Where am I going with my career? What's next for me? So it led me to actually look into, I suppose, some deeper insights into myself and gain a better connection with myself and identify areas within, high performance that were lacking. So it led me on a total journey then of, I suppose, personal development, a journey of self-discovery, all those different layers and dimensions within myself. So I thought, my wife was always saying, you'd be a great manager, you'd be a great goalkeeping coach, all those different things. But there was certain times and certain spaces where I love football. Football was my graw. I lived for football, but I just wanted to get a certain sense of freedom of it, yet still be involved in football to a sense. So what I started to look at was like that in terms of my own mentality. Where was I at in my own mind? Where was I emotionally? Where was I energetically, holistically, all those different developments? And that sent me around the world in search of that. That sent me to India, it sent me to South America, spending time with the Native Americans, all those different things. So what I decided to do then was, just after I retired in I'm 3 years now retired, I set up Pathfinder Coaching and Development. And I went back just before I retired, those years leading up to that, through that change and transition. I went and studied a master's in coaching and development. I went back and trained with the European Mentoring and Coaching Council and created a company that facilitates, high performance coaching and mentoring, personal, team and leadership development, all along those lines. And, we provide one-to-one consultations, workshops, masterclasses, and all which are, available currently, and even transformational travel trips, retreats, workshops, all that level and layer of stuff. Because throughout my career, there was one of the single most important elements to me was a successful team, or that individual performance, that team spirit. What was that? So I started to realize that when a team is strong, it's when it's team morale and the spirit is high, that bulletproof morale is there. And then the team becomes unstoppable. And there was only certain times and spaces throughout my career where I felt that was probably with 3 teams over a career that spanned 20 plus years. So that always fascinated me. And then throughout my career, I was hungry for that kind of emotional, consistent emotional space. And then that led me to explore mentorship, philosophy, cultures, psychology, and having that so much experience and using those tools and techniques that I picked up along the way is, how can I sharpen my tools? How can I build a bridge to overcome those obstacles that were many in my way? Because there was times in my career where I had some amazing highs, but there was also crushing lows. And we always say as footballers is that you could probably count on one hand when you had those elevated states that they were next level. So I looked at that part of the game changer, and what was that game changer for me. And ultimately what it was I used myself as a lab rat, a laboratory as myself, to explore those different avenues of psychology, philosophy, all those different layers and elements. And I've delved deeply into all of them. So then that led to, right, how can I help here? How can I serve others? And how can I give that space to people to explore themselves that is set up safely, it's set up securely with privacy, confidentiality. How can I create that awareness in people? Because we all have a huge level of awareness, but we can always cultivate more. And oftentimes we felt, and throughout my career, I didn't feel that I had many choices or many options. because that was my whole identity built around just being a footballer. And I felt there was more to me than being a footballer. And there was huge voids and gaps that I wasn't fulfilling or enriching myself on certain levels. So I started to seek out the responsibility in that. And that's ultimately the main principles of Pathfinder, is creating awareness and choice and seeking responsibility for ourselves.
Well, it's a great mission. It's a great mission to be on, and I'll have to admit at this point, I've followed your mission, and we've had many conversations around it, and it's been fascinating to watch that development. But you did mention your career, and I think it would be remiss not to touch on that in this conversation, and perhaps some of the things that you learnt through those years that you're now applying. So, for the uninitiated, 24 appearances for the Republic of Ireland in goal, just shy of 300 appearances, I think, for Millwall, competitive appearances. I think you'll correct me, I'm sure.
342.
342. Okay, well, you can blame Wikipedia for that. And of course, many other clubs in between, including Cambridge United, Portsmouth, and of course, a short spell at Derry City, which I wanted to touch on. So what are your memories? Obviously, we're in this part of the world. What are your memories of your spell at Derry City?
What I say to people when they ask me about Derry City, it totally reinvigorated my love for football. After a time of great disheartenment and disillusionment after being released by West Ham, after spending 3 phenomenal years in the Premier League with West Ham and working alongside the likes of David James, Paulo Di Canio, Trevor Sinclair, Freddie Canute, some amazing footballers, Joe Cole, Michael Carrick, and it was such a difficult time. And I came back to Ireland, and at the time, thankfully, Stephen Kenny was looking for a goalkeeper when he became the manager at Derry City, and he found out that I was there, and he drove all the way down to Galway, which is 170 miles, to meet me at a hotel just outside Oramore. And we came in, we met in the hotel, and we had a chat, and he said, look, I need a goalkeeper. And I was like, look, to be honest, it's not the pathway I'm taking forward. I'm looking at, I had applied to go in as a mature student back to NUIG in Galway, and my pathway at that time was to become a school teacher, get involved with Galway GAA. My dream was to play in Croke Park in an All-Ireland final for Galway, and that was the new pathway. And however, Stephen, he had other ideas, and thankfully he did, and he just sold that, that dream to me, that look, just come and enjoy your football, get back into it. You can just travel up to Derry on a Friday, you can train down in Galway. So he understood the place and the space I was in, and just gave me that time and space. So I used to do that drive 170 miles up, 170 miles back, and the name itself says it all really about Derry City. It's the candy stripes. And it was such a sweet time in my career. It was such a sweet time. And we did phenomenally well. We got to almost qualifying as the first team to the group stages of the UEFA Cup. We got beat by Paris Saint-Germain, 2-0 on aggregate. We got beat 2-0 away to Paris. We won the FAI Cup. We won the League Cup twice. And in both years, we lost the league on the last day of the season by goal difference, which was a killer blow. And my last game was the FAI Cup, that famous cup game down in Lansdowne Road, the last game at Lansdowne Road, where we won 4-3. Stephen went on to Dunfermline, I went on to Cardiff, and that kick-started my career again. That kick-started my hunger, and always my dream and my ambition was to go to back to the UK. And my main goal really was to play for Ireland. All I wanted was 1 cap, and to end up with 24 was a phenomenal experience. But the Derry people are so passionate about their football. They love their football. They're great fun, and it really was. And I still have those connections today. Back in Derry City, Paddy McCourt is there. Rory Higgins is the manager, and there were so many players that we had such a great bond and connection. And even now today, I'm back working with Stephen with the Republic of Ireland's men's senior team. So it's been a journey that has. There's been a serious level of connection and cooperation and leading towards something more. And that's really what the journey's been about so far, and just living that whole experience, because it was often times within that where I found it very difficult and trying to get my head around it and not having the right support networks in place. And once I found those support networks, the whole adventure got a whole lot easier, because I started to see the pathways, and I started to find, and hence Pathfinder, having that level of leadership to get through the deep dark woods, and to mold my way into, one of the greatest questions that I was ever asked is, why don't you become the person you want to be? And when I started to look at that, and it triggered and sparked something in me that made a lasting impression. And, when I started to look at coaches throughout my career that's had a major influence on me, the likes of Stephen Kenny, the likes of Giovanni Trapattoni, Martin O'Neill, Roy Keane, so many, Ian Holloway, Kenny Jackett, so many amazing people. And even outside of that, at grassroots level in Galway, Tommy Lally, Joe Riley, people like that, phenomenal minds and phenomenal coaches. And what were they? And that's why I adore that level of what coaching actually is, the science behind it, is someone that is a bridge or a tool that can elevate your game, that we all plan and we all do. But the coach is that one in between that can elevate those spaces, that can make those connections to yourself and to others and everyone else around you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk briefly just about what you're doing with the Ireland football team. You touched on it there. I know we've got issues around confidentiality, which we won't go into. But yeah, in brief, what's your role within the Ireland football team?
Yeah, like we've said, can't really delve into it too much, but it's been a phenomenal journey since last March to come into the FAI, especially when it was under severe pressure financially and economically, and to see the reaction from the grassroots and the fans has been absolutely amazing. They've sold the highest amount of season tickets, I think, ever, even since the Jack Charlton era. So Stephen's doing a phenomenal job there, and the players, there's a young, hungry group of young men there, that there's a new wave of Irish players, and the boys in green coming through the system. So it's just great when Stephen spoke to me and he said, I'd like to get you in to, do the stuff that you do in terms of the performance coaching, getting the mindsets, getting attitudes right, building the culture, looking at various different elements of that. So once I went in, and I suppose the type of work that I do is as a high performance motivator, a high performance influencer, or how we can engineer and architect that space, because these spaces don't just happen by chance. And there was so many times and so many teams where it was just left up to chance. It was just left up to a team bonding night out, and hopefully with a flick of a coin that something switches and it works for the team. And that was left to too much to chance, I think, but how we can cultivate those spaces, and really it's about how we can eradicate fears and stuff. And even as a high performer myself at the highest level and playing international football, there were still so many fears that I carried into my games and into my performances. And really, like what I said, when I started to receive that unconditional support, no matter what I said or did, there was always a solution. It was solution focused. And my work is as a solutionary. It's like, well, can we see the problem? Right, that's great. That's just giving us a signpost. It's a pathway to actually make a choice to say, well, hang on, this is the information we've been given. This is how we can look at it differently. And doing things, it's not about doing anything different, but doing it differently. Can we think outside the box? Can we get that creative juices flowing and think about, right, how can we create a culture that is there for, that people care about each other. And once we find that care, and we bring that sense of love and belonging into a space, it empowers people. It empowers people to be free and to remove any inhibitions and limitations that, one thing I always found throughout my career was all the different team dynamics and the complexity of teams. And that was something I studied for my master's, was complexity in the corporate dressing room. And that came from the complexity within the changing room, and how when we started to see that things emerge, how things adapt, they connect and flow, and how a sense of balance brings, and whether that's an evolutionary action or a devolutionary action, that'll determine the team spirit and how everybody gets along. So there were certain really interesting facets of team development, and how we can create that space, as I said, of no ambitions. Because, as I said earlier, there was times within teams where there was, in-house fractions or divisions or cliques or whatever it happens in those spaces. So I always felt that before we went out onto the pitch, we were already 1-0 down. So we're in-house fighting with ourselves before we go out. And as modern day warriors, when we step out over that line, we're already behind. So if we can build that sense of, inclusion, that sense of acceptance, that sense of cooperation and collaboration, then we realize that we empower everyone, that everybody wants to get ahead. Because there was oftentimes within leaders, and I've seen, people in spaces, that they were more concerned about themselves getting ahead. So there's always that imbalance within team sport, or within teams and organizations that I work with at the moment, is people want to get ahead themselves. But if everybody works together, everybody gets ahead, not just the one individual. And it's like the great proverb, isn't it? Faster alone, further together. And that was something that always stuck in my mind.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting as you were talking there, just obviously thinking about the corporate world. Just finally, let's bring this story right up to date. So, what have you learned? What surprised you when you stepped into the corporate world from the sporting world, or did you find a lot of similarities in the problems or the issues and challenges that you've been asked to get involved with?
100%. What I've discovered holistically is, at the end of the day, it all comes down to identity. We're all people at the end of the day. Everything else is just a label and a tag. Whether you're a footballer, whether you're a CEO, whatever it is, we still have these universal themes and issues to actually deal with. And once we start to overcome that, once we start to look at those things, and we start to actually realize is that, I used to have a big problem with myself owning that I was even a footballer, because even when I used to speak about being a footballer, I used to tell people I was nearly, I was a bricklayer. I worked for Coca-Cola and Cadbury's. I did all those things with my dad years ago, because I carried such shame, because I was so afraid of the stigma that was attached to being with footballers. So there was huge parts of myself that I wasn't actually owning as a footballer, and it hindered my performance on the pitch, because I wasn't empowered in what I was actually doing. So when I looked at, for me, my whole philosophy is around people first, employees second, or people first, player second. And when we start to adopt that type of philosophy, then I think we all start to get ahead. Because the biggest thing is the ego, and we all understand, well, a lot of people start to see how ego is everyone's greatest obstacle. And once I started to get out of my own way, that's when I started to get ahead in my life.
Well, David, I tell you, it's been fascinating talking to you. We have done in the past, gone on for a very long time having these
Yeah,
conversations.
absolutely. We could talk all day, but I'm just
maybe we'll
absolutely
do.
delighted for the opportunity.
Well, you're more than welcome. Maybe we can do a part two in the coming weeks and months. But I think your contact details are going to come up at the end of this conversation. And anyone in business, I would recommend that you reach out and have a conversation with you, because your insight is absolutely phenomenal. And
Thank you.
Best of luck to you and the whole team at Pathfinder into the future. You won't need it though, but we'll give it to you anyway.
No, I always need the well wishers. You can't beat the well wishers, So thanks a million for having me on this morning. And like that, you can contact me on Instagram, LinkedIn, on my website, whatever that may be, or just email me. You got it up there. It'd be great to hear from you.
Well, it's been our pleasure, and thanks for being our guest this week.
David, you're a gentleman. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.